Tonight, on 24, Washington's plan to overthrow Iran with unprecedented sanctions.
The U.S. Treasury Secretary says this plan will succeed and bring down the Iranian regime. Tehran says this is a failed policy.
Fresh Houthi attacks on Saudi Arabia amid maritime insecurity. Nadran Airport and Aramco facilities were targeted, and an oil tanker was also hijacked off the coast of Yemen.
And meaningful reactions in Baghdad to Ghalibaf's trip to Iraq. The Speaker of Iraq's parliament posted an image using the name Arab Gulf.
From the studios of Iran International, this is 24 with Fardad Farahzad.
Hello and good day to Iran International viewers in Iran and around the world. A few hours ago, the U.S. Treasury Secretary said Washington wants to impose the toughest sanctions in history against the Islamic Republic and intends to overthrow the Islamic Republic with this plan. Meanwhile, the U.S. president announced the launch of the heaviest economic operation against the Islamic Republic, describing it as economic warfare and unprecedented isolation. Donald Trump also threatened countries that help Iran bypass economic pressure with severe consequences. Washington's new threat to wage economic warfare against the Islamic Republic and its trading partners has met with global reactions, including from China. Beijing said sanctions are not the solution to the Iran crisis and called for resolving disputes through diplomacy.
Our correspondents Samira Garai from the White House and Mariam Rahmati from UN headquarters in New York are joining us. Samira, Iran is already one of the most sanctioned countries in the world. What do we know about the U.S. Treasury Department's new plan? That is entirely correct. It has officially become the most heavily sanctioned entity to date. Furthermore, the message that Mr. Trump posted yesterday on Twitter effectively provides a comprehensive summary of the key developments we are anticipating throughout the course of this week. During the previous week, the Treasury Secretary announced that the administration was preparing to reveal and implement what would be the largest and most extensive sanctions in history against an isolated nation, specifically targeting the Islamic Republic in the coming days. In direct alignment with those official statements and broader strategy, Mr. Trump proactively shared his post to reiterate that momentum and outline what is expected next. However, that statement notably lacks specific operational details, leaving it fundamentally unclear how the administration intends to enforce these ambitious measures in practice. They are issuing broad warnings to nations across the globe, demanding that international partners cease all trade with the Islamic Republic of Iran immediately. Furthermore, the message calls upon these global allies to align firmly with the United States in actively confronting and ultimately dismantling the persistent threats posed by Tehran. Mr. Trump is outlining an aggressive economic vision, drawing historical parallels to World War II and framing the situation like a pivotal D-Day turning point where a monumental global decision is rapidly unfolding, a critical milestone that officially commenced just yesterday. Across the United States today, Mr. Bessent initiated a series of conversations with several prominent media outlets before stepping out onto the White House lawn to briefly address the press corps regarding the administration's strategic plans. While he offered initial insights into the upcoming agenda, more comprehensive and detailed information is scheduled for release on Monday. At that time, Mr. Bessent will personally convene a formal press conference to present all the specifics directly. It's noteworthy that this move Mr. Trump made yesterday came hours after the United Arab Emirates decided to cut off trade with the Islamic Republic, and that decision came after a phone call Mr. Trump had with the president of the United Arab Emirates. All these developments are now happening together to build a massive campaign of maximum pressure on the Islamic Republic, specifically economic pressure. Additionally, as Mr. Bessent emphasized today, immediate military action appears unlikely in the short term, particularly as this evolving economic strategy shifts the Trump administration's primary strategy toward a naval blockade. However, it remains entirely uncertain how this current approach truly differs from prior historical efforts. Specifically, it is still unclear whether officials have developed a fully realized, effective mechanism that genuinely sets this strategy apart from the decades of ongoing economic sanctions and diplomatic pressure previously levied against the Islamic Republic. However, the situation unfolding with the United Arab Emirates represents an entirely unprecedented development. Because of this, we must closely observe and wait to see what specific policy measures they ultimately choose to implement regarding their key economic issues. Adding to these developments, another significant update emerged last night via Axios, which cited informed sources. This newly reported information aligns quite closely with the various comments and public statements that Mr. Trump has been making in recent days. The topic of controlling the the Strait of Hormuz is also very important. They're reporting that the U.S. government implemented a covert, secret operation over the past few weeks, and daily, more than 10 million barrels of oil exited the Strait of Hormuz. 10 to 15 tankers were exiting. Is it the data we've talked about every night that Kedler says this number passed through yesterday, or various other institutes? Whether these 10 or 15 tankers were among those or not, that's not clear, but this was a measure taken by the United States. According to informed officials, U.S. Central Command forces efficiently coordinated operations through their strategic naval assets deployed in the region, supported by local Persian Gulf area partners. Command operations were centrally directed from North Carolina, a tactical setup that experts credit for the mission's remarkable success. Over a 2-week period, precision strikes were carried out deep within Iranian territory, specifically targeting critical radar networks, advanced air defense systems, and strategic missile launch platforms. By systematically disabling these key defensive installations, the coalition neutralized immediate regional threats. As a result, American forces have successfully established firm operational control over the vital Strait of Hormuz. This newly secured dominance now ensures the safe navigation of commercial oil tankers passing into and out of the strategic waterway, effectively restoring stability to international shipping lanes. To be exceptionally effective, experts noted that Allied forces essentially blinded the Islamic Republic by destroying key military radar systems over those crucial 2 weeks. Deprived of critical targeting data, the regime is now resorting to firing missiles and drones largely at random. Although these indiscriminate strikes are far less precise, they remain dangerous. In recent days, several commercial oil tankers and cargo vessels were successfully hit in regional shipping lanes. Nevertheless, this shift represents a major strategic turning point. When combined with a reinstated maximum pressure sanctions campaign, these events carry immense geopolitical weight. Ultimately, President Trump remains convinced that by neutralizing these threats and maintaining a dominant naval presence, the United States can effectively control, secure, and regulate the flow of maritime traffic through the vital Strait of Hormuz. They can push these measures to the ultimate limit, using them to influence global oil prices and sustain relentless economic pressure against the Islamic Republic for as long as possible. Miriam, the real success of these newly introduced sanctions naturally depends on strict enforcement by major nations that maintain extensive trade relations with Iran, specifically countries like the UAE, Turkey, Pakistan, and most importantly, China, which remains a key economic partner. Given the high stakes involved, what has been the official reaction or response from these crucial regional and global powers up to this moment regarding their willingness to comply with these expanding restrictions? Looking ahead to tomorrow, the focus undeniably shifts toward China, which has already delivered the most significant international response so far. As the primary destination for the bulk of the Islamic Republic's exported crude oil, Beijing finds itself directly in the crosshairs of Donald Trump's latest geopolitical warning. Addressing these developments today, China's foreign ministry firmly stated that imposing strict sanctions and economic pressure will not resolve the ongoing crisis. Instead, Beijing urged all involved parties to abandon punitive measures, return to the negotiating table, and rely on constructive diplomacy to de-escalate tensions. This clear and deliberate push for diplomatic engagement follows the recent announcement of Trump's updated strategy, highlighting the growing international friction surrounding the policy. This situation came about when Donald Trump issued a stern warning, threatening that any sovereign nation offering an economic lifeline to the Islamic Republic would face severe financial and economic repercussions from the United States. This geopolitical pressure directly puts Beijing in the crosshairs, as credible energy trade data demonstrates that China currently purchases upwards of 90% of all crude oil exported by the Islamic Republic. Furthermore, economic records from the previous year revealed that China was Tehran's second largest overall commercial partner, sitting just behind the United Arab Emirates. However, in light of recent geopolitical shifts, where the United Arab Emirates has officially severed its trade relations with the Islamic Republic, Beijing now undisputedly stands as the primary economic patron. Consequently, China undisputedly emerges at the absolute forefront as Tehran's most vital trading partner, and by far the single largest purchaser of the Islamic Republic's exported oil reserves. Lately, a major question circulating throughout Washington and across American media outlets centers on how far the United States is truly prepared to go in escalating its financial pressures and broad economic warfare against China. This aggressive strategy mirrors the economic sanctions Washington long ago declared against the Islamic Republic. Ever since the conflict began, U.S. authorities have actively targeted major Chinese sanctions a vast array of independent Chinese refineries and energy companies because their access to U.S. dollar financial and observers now closely monitor whether Washington will intensify these punitive actions or seek a diplomatic balance to protect financial institutions and actually enforces these. It could significantly increase the cost of the Islamic Republic's oil trade and target one of Tehran's most vital sources of foreign revenue. But so far, it had refrained from sanctioning major Chinese banks that actually play a role in financing the Islamic Republic's oil trade. Analysts say the success of Donald Trump's economic war policy against Iran depends largely on China, which stands in his way. This issue is critical because China does not recognize unilateral U.S. sanctions, raising this repeatedly in Security Council meetings. However, Trump might be forced to go after the larger financial institutions that facilitate this ongoing trade with the Islamic Republic. Either way, this inevitable friction causes economic tension between Washington and Beijing to intensify once again, taking center stage in global politics, which certainly wouldn't serve the strategic or financial interests of the United States. In fact, starting even today, we are already hearing persistent whispers throughout UN headquarters, indicating that numerous members of the broader international community are deeply concerned about this resurfacing friction. They fear that an escalating disagreement between these two major global superpowers could unexpectedly spiral into a whole new conflict, sparked directly by the contentious barrier posed by the ongoing war with Iran. William Figueroa, a professor of international relations, emphasizes that if the United States merely repeats its familiar pattern of previous sanctions by targeting the same Chinese refineries, the effort will falter. These entities possess vast, specialized experience in circumventing restrictions, knowing precisely how to establish illicit maritime routes and financial channels to import oil from the Islamic Republic of Iran into China. Consequently, the broader economic campaign declared by Donald Trump must directly confront China as a whole. If Washington takes this aggressive step, it will spark an overt geopolitical confrontation between the two superpowers, proving that successfully curtailing these illicit energy flows decisively requires completely new enforcement methods. Furthermore, occurring precisely ahead of the high-stakes planned summit between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, this development threatens to significantly heighten diplomatic tensions between the two powers while carrying immense geopolitical risk. Additionally, official reactions emerged directly from the Islamic Republic of Iran, as reported by Fardad. Key officials, including Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, strongly criticized Donald Trump's newly outlined strategy. They emphatically declared that this aggressive economic warfare is ultimately destined to fail, drawing a direct parallel to previous American military campaigns in the region that similarly failed to achieve their objective. I will return to you with further updates shortly.
Thanks to Sardar, Mariam Ramati, and Samira Garai.
In Tehran, the foreign minister of the Islamic Republic called Washington's economic pressure a failed policy. Abbas Araghchi says that more pressure won't force the Islamic Republic to accept America's demands. The head of the National Security Commission also said that any miscalculation will have even heavier consequences than in the past.
Our guest, Siomak Javadi, lecturer and researcher in financial economics at the University of Texas, and my colleague Kambiz Tavana from our other studio in Washington have joined us. Kambiz, I'll start with you. What new element could these sanctions really bring? Like I said earlier to Samira, right now Iran is perhaps setting aside the Russian Federation, more sanctioned than almost any other country. What else can the Americans add? Fardad, I had a detailed interview yesterday with Carrie Bessent, a former official from the U.S. Department of the Treasury and the OFAC office, whose job over the past few years happened to be implementing sanctions on Iran. It'll be broadcast soon, but in short, there's a serious question that's being raised here too, where they say, for example, that we've imposed the toughest sanctions, but the details aren't coming out as to what these toughest sanctions are actually going to be. Then there is another critical issue to consider. The specific terminology used to describe a sanction, or even the sheer volume of restrictions announced, is ultimately irrelevant. The true measure of any sanction's effectiveness lies entirely in its rigorous enforcement. It is undeniably simple for a government or international body to declare a new penalty and make headlines, but without consistent, active monitoring and real consequences for violations, those declarations remain completely ineffective based on the statements made since yesterday, and particularly taking into account the prior remarks made by Scott Bessent, there are two realistic possibilities regarding this strategic situation that warrant serious analysis moving forward. One is that Mr. Bessent had mentioned several times before that the biggest mistake of the Islamic Republic of Iran was launching missile attacks on its allies in the region, including the United States, the United Arab Emirates, and regional countries. Yesterday, the United Arab Emirates announced that it is stopping all its financial and commercial transactions with the Islamic Republic. Mr. Bessent had said that what the Islamic Republic did with these attacks forced these countries, which sometimes turned a blind eye to certain things and weren't willing to talk about them, to start handing over to us all the information and communications they had regarding financial and commercial exchanges with Iran. There is a possibility that a specific network, specific individuals, a specific group, or certain industries, which they've now become aware of, can be stopped. And since the United Arab Emirates has agreed to make this deal, they can actually execute it. That is one possibility. Another major issue that frequently emerges during geopolitical discussions about China is Washington's enforcement limits. Whenever financial transactions bypass the standard paper trail of dollar-denominated exchanges and bypass the broader international economic infrastructure, America possesses virtually zero capability to enforce its sanctions or mandates. While the aggressive rhetoric and official warnings issued by U.S. policymakers entirely, actual structural power remains limited in these off-grid trade channels. For instance, when Iran sells crude oil directly to independent Chinese teapot refineries, the entire transaction bypasses Western mechanisms. These entities forego traditional maritime insurance and standard interbank systems like SWIFT, settling payments either directly in Chinese yuan or through barter arrangements for goods and services, completely insulated from U.S. leverage. These are just completely impossible to enforce unless you actually want to have military or monitoring forces on the ground in a region at a given time, so they can intercept and monitor them ahead of time. And America is neither in a position to do that under these circumstances, nor does such a reaction to these two demand something like that. A main guess, meaning the biggest speculation right now, is that some kind of information has been provided to the U.S. Department of the Treasury, or was already in their possession beforehand. And based on that, they want to impose a series of sanctions. And I don't think these sanctions are going to be the classic ones that were always applied and shut down. This is basically a collaboration between various countries and the U.S. to come and pinpoint this information, or say who is doing this exchange where, and be able to cut it off with the diplomatic pressure the U.S. is bringing. I think for Washington, this is the best option right now, because everyone is saying no to war. They're opposing war and military action. But in terms of financial pressure and economic pressure measures, almost everyone from both parties fully agrees with it, which gives more room for action to the current U.S. administration in Washington. On the other hand, those groups over there in the region who might not be too opposed to military operations might say, all right, fine, we won't launch a military attack with you, but you come collaborate with us like this so we can stop these guys. Another thing that I just need to say, to add in the middle of this, yesterday, Ali Golhaki, who is a figure close to Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, said that according to information that reached them, the U.S. is paving the southern part of the Strait of Hormuz so that traffic can flow easily through there. And the concern he highlighted is that if the U.S. can rest easy knowing a corridor has been created there through which transactions happen easily, then the U.S. has no need to, so to speak, pay any money, release any frozen assets, or even be willing to ease its pressure. All these things were the value that the Strait of Hormuz had for us, and we could get these things in exchange for it. If this happens, it means the leverage is being lost. That's why I think in the current climate, none of the statements being made, from Donald, Scott, to sanctions, are in the classic sense. They mean a specific action that maybe they aren't mentioning, or can't mention, or don't want to mention. But anyway, there's something outside that conventional meaning of sanctions that they're putting pressure on. Mr. Javadi, I suppose this recent move by the UAE to completely halt transactions with Iran, well, that's an important move. Even now, you cannot simply go to HSBC or Emirates NBD to wire money to Iran. Transfers happen through exchange offices and cryptocurrencies. What enforcement mechanisms do the Americans really have? And how much will other countries cooperate? How much intelligence work does tracking this require, given that a major portion of this gray economy is completely underground and notoriously difficult to monitor?
Look, as he mentioned, I also don't believe we have entered an entirely new legal regime regarding sanctions enforcement. Many of the specific measures and concepts Trump highlighted in that tweet were already established policy tools. But what has clearly shifted is the political landscape. A strong political will has now emerged to execute these existing rules with significantly greater intensity, focus, and vigor. Naturally, if the goal is to enforce these sanctions far more effectively, as you correctly pointed out, achieving full, seamless coordination among all regional partners is essential, with the critical involvement and diplomatic cooperation of key players like the United Arab Emirates being absolute paramount to success. Look, the United Arab Emirates is Iran's most important trading partner. It's not just the lifeline of the Islamic Republic, but its connecting path to the world economy. On the other hand, more than 30% of the country's total imports come from the United Arab Emirates, and we shouldn't just focus on the number. The point is that a lot of these imports coming from the UAE aren't actually Emirati goods. These are goods that, for example, were made in Germany, Korea, or Japan, and are being re-exported to Iran. In my view, any sudden disruption importing these crucial goods from the United Arab Emirates creates consequences that extend far beyond raw nominal figures, additively fracturing the broader global supply chain network. Consequently, establishing a robust and seamlessly coordinated collaboration between the United States and all involved international partners becomes absolutely vital to maintain commerce and economic stability. However, while strengthening these bilateral strategic ties remains essential for navigating trade vulnerabilities, the ultimate test of long-term resilience and geopolitical balance inevitably traces right back to China. In my opinion, the strategic approach they have chosen to pursue will only prove successful under very specific geopolitical conditions. First, if the persistent disconnect with the UAE, essentially the sustained absence of robust bilateral trade connections, remains intact, and second, if China ultimately decides to bow down when facing pressure from the United States. As Mr. Tavana correctly pointed out, Beijing is currently purchasing roughly 80% of Iran's total oil exports. However, this commercial relationship is fundamentally asymmetrical, considering that Iranian crude constitutes a mere 12% of China's overall oil imports. When evaluated strictly through this pragmatic cost-benefit framework, it becomes evident that China's willingness to absorb economic or diplomatic costs to protect Iran extends only out to a very clear and calculated threshold. Sure, it can use Iran as a geopolitical leverage point in the region against the United States, and it gets huge discounts from Iran. Iran is selling its oil to China nearly $8 to $9 below the market price. All of this is true, but well, the point is that, for example, a $14–15 billion annual discount compared to a business worth hundreds of billions that they have with the US, it really doesn't make much financial sense for China to pay that price. That's why we need to see how far China is actually willing to bow down. I think that's the key to the whole thing. If each of these were to happen on its own, I think the Islamic Republic has the ability to manage the situation. I mean, if China, you have to look at China like it's the engine generating foreign exchange for the Islamic Republic. The UAE works differently. It's like the plumbing of Iran's economy, where you tap into that pipeline of resources and turn them into goods and services. Both of these have to fail at the same time, meaning foreign exchange earnings need to drop, which means China backing down to an extent, while the UAE also cuts ties on its end. If China doesn't back down, but the UAE keeps its connection, then you'll have a drop in foreign exchange earnings, but the Islamic Republic can still manage the situation to a degree. Iran retains alternative strategies. It can drastically slash incoming imports or rely heavily on its existing reserves. Naturally, this process severely wrecks the domestic economy and causes widespread public suffering, but the extreme outcome Scott Bessent predicts won't actually materialize. Conversely, I believe the inverse holds true as well. If foreign exchange earnings plummet, yet a crucial financial connection with the UAE remains fully intact, Iran can still navigate and manage the crisis to some degree. In my view, the situation ultimately hinges on mutual concessions, meaning foreign foreign currency revenues experience a drop. China yields to U.S. diplomatic pressure to a certain extent, and simultaneously, the UAE continues incrementally severing its long-standing commercial ties with Iran. I think both of these things need to happen simultaneously.
Thank you, Mr. Siamak Javadi, lecturer and researcher in financial economics at the University of Texas, and my colleague, Kambiz Tavana, from our studio in Washington. Yemen's Houthis say they targeted Nadran Airport and Saudi Aramco facilities with 2 drones. A Houthi spokesperson said both attacks were successful and were conducted in response to Saudi Arabia's violation of Saada's airspace. At the same time, an oil tanker was hijacked by armed men near the coast of Yemen, and reports say its course was redirected toward Somalia. Al Arabiya has also reported the deaths of 3 personnel linked to the IRGC in clashes with Yemeni government forces. Mohammad al-Basha, a strategic communications expert from Washington, joins us. Mr. al-Basha, thank you for accepting our invitation. Do you think this escalation between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia could open up a full-scale war front?
The indicator.
At present, the available evidence strongly indicates that Yemen is rapidly escalating toward a full-scale armed conflict. This devastating trajectory is something that the internationally recognized legitimate government of Yemen is desperately seeking to avoid. Similarly, Saudi Arabian leadership remains opposed to a wider war. They have actively pursued back-channel diplomacy, attempting both direct and indirect communications with Houthi leadership through ongoing diplomatic talks in Muscat, Oman. Despite these concerted peace efforts, the Houthis appear convinced that the current political and military landscape provides an opportunistic moment for aggression. Consequently, they are actively mobilizing their forces, making aggressive strategic advancements toward the critical Bab el-Mandab Strait and pressing forward along Yemen's vital western coastline. This dangerous maneuver threatened to further destabilize the broader region, undermine critical maritime trade routes, and sink any immediate hosts, because the importance of Bab el-Mandab has increased due to the restrictions Iran has imposed on the Strait of Hormuz. So this boosts the value of Bab el-Mandab, which is why the Houthis are putting more pressure on both the Saudi coalition forces and the legitimate government of Yemen.
It seems that toward the Islamic Republic, Riyadh had exercised a considerable amount of patience in this recent conflict. If these Houthi attacks continue, do you think Saudi Arabia's stance toward Tehran might shift as well?
Saudi Arabia recently integrated more deeply with U.S. Central Command, actively participating in targeted strikes within Iraq. This decisive maneuver served as an unmistakable deterrent signal aimed directly at Tehran, while simultaneously delivering a stern warning to the Houthi movement. It clearly indicates that Riyadh's strategic patience is wearing thin, making sustained military operations increasingly necessary to effectively push back against these persistent threats. At present, direct military confrontation between Saudi and Iranian armed forces remains minimal on the battlefield. Instead, Tehran continues to exert intense asymmetric pressure on the kingdom through its network of regional proxies, notably leveraging the Islamic resistance in Iraq along the northern flank and supporting Houthi operations against southern Saudi Arabia. Consequently, this ongoing proxy dynamic continues to reshape the evolving regional security environment. At present, the Saudi authorities appear to feel sufficiently secure or strategic in their stance that they see little need to focus heavily on Iran. Consequently, the Houthis are growing increasingly anxious and uneasy because the Saudis have largely ignored their recent strikes, conspicuously refraining from issuing formal condemnations or escalating their rhetoric. This lack of reaction leaves the Houthis in a precarious and vulnerable position. Their concerns are heightened by recent developments on the ground, where dozens of Houthi fighters were killed in precise targeted strikes conducted by Yemeni government drones. This sharp escalation in casualties underscores their shifting military fortunes and deepens their growing sense of isolation.
Even right now, one of the most vital arteries of global trade, the Strait of Hormuz, is facing disruption. The Houthis are a major threat to the Bab el-Mandeb and the Red Sea. There was a time when the Houthis were just a headache for the Saudis, but now they're turning into a problem for the international community. Do you think the Saudis will try to sell this package to Westerners, especially the US, that the Houthis aren't just our problem anymore, they're everyone's problem, so come and help?
I think Houthis
I think the Houthi stance after October 7th, when they started naval operations in the Red Sea, near Aden and the Arabian Sea, completely changed these equations. They went from a so-called oppressed group in Yemen to a group that is endangering freedom of navigation in the Red Sea and the surrounding maritime corridors. So I don't think the legitimate government of Yemen or the Saudis need to make much effort to make the international community aware of the threats and challenges posed by the Houthis. The whole world has witnessed this.
کل جهان شاهد بوده این.
At present, intense strategic calculations are unfolding on all sides as key geopolitical players carefully weigh their options. In the United States, officials view the Houthi threat as manageable for now because the group has not completely blocked the vital Bab el-Mandeb Strait or directly targeted U.S. Navy vessels. American leadership sees no immediate necessity to escalate conflict or launch a direct military confrontation against them in the region. But, well, if the Houthis keep up these provocations, these attacks, hitting this airport or hitting that facility, then a Saudi operation against them will take place in Yemen. And at that point, the U.S. will be forced to support the Saudis, both with refueling and with intelligence. But, well, for now, it seems like the legitimate government of Yemen is trying its best to the extent that it can to push the Houthis back.
Thank you. Mohammed Al-Basha, strategic communications expert, joining us from Washington.
The Speaker of the Iraqi Parliament, one day after meeting with Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, published an image on social media that used another name for the Persian Gulf. This image was published in reaction to a post Ghalibaf had shared about his trip to Baghdad. Ghalibaf met with several senior Iraqi officials on Wednesday. During his meeting with him, Haibat al-Halbusi had asked for special conditions to be considered for Iraq's oil exports through the Strait of Hormuz.
Ali Rizan Nurizadeh, director of the Center for Arab and Iranian Studies, is with us from London. Mr. Nurizadeh, it seems like the Iraqis aren't really talking secretly or behind closed doors anymore. They are taking positions against Islamic Republic officials very openly.
Warmest greetings to all our valued viewers, with a special salute to the courageous men and women residing back home in Iran. My dear friend, let us be entirely frank. Since taking power, the Islamic Republic has consistently failed to prioritize the true national interests of Iran, have persistently referred to the Persian Gulf as the Arabian Gulf. The regime in Tehran has repeatedly overlooked such territorial and historical slights, carrying the heavy burden of failing to stand firm and defend the sacred sovereignty and heritage of our nation. Since the time of Fath Ali Shah Qajar, we're seeing this happening. On one side, they give away the Caspian Sea. On another side, disruptions are created at the borders, in the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, every day, and now in Iraq. First, we need to see why Ghalibaf went to Iraq. This is very important. 2 weeks ago, Ismail Ha'ani, commander of the Quds Force, went to Iraq. His primary mission was to align key militant groups, specifically the Houthi faction still loyal to the Islamic Republic, Harakat al-Nujaba, Asaib al-Haq, and Badr commander Hadi al-Amidi's faction. He sought to secure their active sympathy and operational support for regional conflicts targeting Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, alongside stepped-up cross-border operations against Iraqi Kurdistan. Ultimately, Ha'ani failed to achieve these strategic objectives. This dynamic underscores how regional proxy leaders no longer afford him the immense authority or credibility that they once readily yielded to his predecessor, Qasem Soleimani. Faced with this deepening rift, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, a higher-ranking political senior, was dispatched directly to conduct high-level diplomatic outreach, though the resulting discussions remained strictly routine and achieved no major breakthroughs. The diplomatic itinerary began with a meeting with the president of Iraq, followed by discussions with the prime minister, and concluded with a session alongside the Speaker of Parliament. During these exchanges, Speaker Halbusi presented specific demands to Mr. Ghalibaf regarding the transit of Iraqi crude oil through the strategic Strait of Hormuz. However, before his Iranian guest even had a full hour to exit the room, Mr. Halbusi publicly posted a photograph displaying the regional body of water. Right behind his guest's back, he prominently featured the term Arabian Gulf instead of Persian Gulf. Regrettably, Mr. Ghalibaf failed to demonstrate demonstrate sufficient national pride to immediately terminate his official visit and walk out and protest. I might just need to mention something for you. The late Kambiz Atabay, head of the Football Federation, was supposed to become the head of the Asian Football Confederation while in Kuwait. They put up a map there with Arabian Gulf, and he walked out and protest to return to Iran. The Kuwaitis scrambled, and within 15 minutes, the Arabian Gulf turned back into the Persian Gulf. I want to tell you that if you don't care, you'll end up like Mr. Ghalibaf. You'll end up like the rest of the Islamic Republic leaders. Honestly, Iraqi sovereignty is clearly entering a new era following Prime Minister al-Sudani's landmark US visit. After securing 47 bilateral agreements, Iraq naturally won't yield to pressure from the Islamic Republic as easily as it did in the past. This shift becomes even more evident when considering Tehran's evolving relationships with neighboring Arab nations across the broader Middle East today.
But other Arab neighbors in the region can easily, well, if not easily, relatively easily cut off their relations with Tehran to a great extent, just like we saw the United Arab Emirates do. Iraq's situation is a bit different. Iran's influence is deeply intertwined inside this country. How tough do you think a road lies ahead for those Iraqi politicians who aren't extortion victims of the Islamic Republic or don't have good relations, especially given the influence Tehran has and even the proxy groups that are there?
Fardad, beyond that pervasive Iranian political influence, a terrifying, tangible threat constantly looms directly over Iraqi politicians. The Islamic Republic has officially demonstrated its willingness to assassinate targeted figures before, and these officials are genuinely terrified. Most notably, the former Speaker of the Iraqi parliament faced dire personal threats. Ultimately, he chose not to run this term at all, proving that his deep-seated fear is completely real. Executing a political hit is tragically simple and widespread in modern Iraq. So, while breaking free remains extraordinarily difficult, I firmly believe Prime Minister Sudani's recent diplomatic trip marked a decisive turning point went to the US and had talks. But because their right hand was sworn in allegiance to Sayyid Ali Khamenei, they usually played it sly and slicked out of their commitments. This time, in my opinion, Mr. Sudani, who is a banker and an economist, isn't so tainted by behind-closed-doors politics, and the president too, and even the foreign minister are fed up with the Islamic Republic's operations in Kurdistan. I genuinely believe the region's overall political atmosphere is undergoing a major shift right now. Mr. Ghalibaf recently traveled to Karbala, and if he proceeds to Najaf only for Ayatollah Sistani to refuse a meeting, that snub would be a crucial indicator. To me, it would signal that Iraq is actively freeing itself from the deep shadow of the Islamic Republic. Concurrently, Iraq's economic stability has improved substantially, meaning its leaders desperately want to avoid renewed American diplomatic pressure, heavy economic sanctions, or direct threats. Seeing how the United Arab Emirates navigated similar pressures has emboldened Iraqi leadership as well. The UAE even attempted to pay off the Islamic Republic, yet Tehran failed to curb its aggression, proving that submission does not guarantee safety or lasting peace. As discussed in the recent news, the aggressive escalation by the Houthis represents an outright official declaration of war against Saudi Arabia. These severe attacks directly target crucial oil refineries, strategic military bases, and vital civilian infrastructure. Critically, these assaults are executed using advanced weaponry supplied by the Islamic Republic. Consequently, the regime in Tehran has completely alienated itself, leaving it without a single genuine ally across the Arab world. By arming these proxies, the Islamic Republic has actively forged a united enemy coalition against itself, standing in stark contrast to the pre-Khomeini era when Iran enjoyed exceptionally close, peaceful diplomatic relations with all its Arab neighbors.
Thank you, Ali Reza Nurizadeh, Director of the Center for Arab and Iranian Studies, joining us from London. Thank you.
The leader of Canada's Conservative Party announced talks with Prince Reza Pahlavi and an invitation for him to visit Canada. Pierre Poilievre said the two sides discussed continuing pressure on the Islamic Republic, maintaining internet access for Iranians, and using the regime's frozen assets to support the Iranian people. He also emphasized that Iran's future should be determined by Iranians through free elections, stating that Canadian conservatives support comprehensive sanctions, the seizure of Islamic Republic assets, and the expulsion of IRGC members from Canada. Reporting live from Toronto, Masa Mortazavi joins us now to share details on this invitation.
Fardad, it was really interesting that this virtual meeting was also welcomed by Canadian media, from the Globe and Mail to CTV, the Canadian Press, CTV News. All of them covered this news. As someone who, as an alternative figure for the Iranian Canadian community, now had a meeting with the conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, who has always been one of the defenders of the Iranian Canadian community. He had a meeting on Saturday with a group of Iranians in North Vancouver, where he announced right there that they had arranged a virtual meeting with Prince Reza Pahlavi, which was received with huge enthusiasm by the people. As you yourself mentioned a number of the main points, it was said that in this virtual meeting they talked about the people's free access to the internet, that they have the right to have access to the global community through the internet as one of their primary rights. And we repeatedly heard this from the Conservative Party when the internet was shut down, that the Islamic Republic's assets confiscated here should be used to help the people. In helping the Iranian people, in the meeting they had on the 15th, they specifically talked about the victims of Flight PS 752, that they can use these assets as compensation to address the families of the victims of Flight PS 752. Also, there was talk about ensuring free elections in Iran, that Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, as the leader of the transition period, has accepted this responsibility himself to safely guide Iran past the Islamic Republic, and then the people can shape the destiny of their own country at the ballot boxes. And as a result, this right is preserved for the people. Additionally, the discussion emphasized the critical need to sustain strong international pressure on the Islamic Republic, raising concerns that Canada may not currently be exerting sufficient leverage against the regime. While proposals to re-establish diplomatic relations occasionally surface, the speaker argued firmly that such efforts must cease immediately. He highlighted the resolute stance of the Conservative Party, assuring that they would never pursue normal diplomatic ties with the regime. Furthermore, he reaffirmed the Conservatives' unwavering commitment to supporting and advocating for the Iranian Canadian community, emphasizing that the party will never fall short when it comes to defending their interests, ensuring their voices are heard, and taking active measures to keep the community protected. And Jews, regarding the influence of Islamic Republic operatives here in Canada, so they can actually prevent the anti-Semitic actions that the Islamic Republic is carrying out here in Canada now, and also the threats and intimidation that have been repeatedly carried out against the Iranian Canadian community by institutions affiliated with the Islamic Republic, which he also mentioned at the meeting he had on the 15th among Iranians, that I will convey your greetings and concerns to Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. He has done this in this meeting, and in a post he published on social media, he also wrote that he actually conveyed the talks held in that meeting to Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, talks that are probably very familiar to Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, because Iranians all over the world have pretty much similar concerns. And he said that a trip to Canada is also part of their future plans, that he invited Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi to visit Canada to talk more about these matters. But tomorrow, the important point of this meeting is that it could perhaps be said that for the first time since the People's National Revolution, Canada has reached out to Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi as an alternative, something that Iranian Canadians are very hopeful will continue.
Thank you very much to our reporter Masa Mortazavi, who joined us live with that report from Toronto, Canada. Before we wrap up tonight's broadcast, I would like to direct your attention to these live tracking images displaying maritime vessel movement throughout the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman for a few moments. As you can clearly observe on the map, much like the patterns we have documented in recent weeks and months, the strategic Strait of Hormuz remains remarkably quiet and is currently more or less empty of typical ship traffic. To help you read the radar map on your screens, the red icons represent oil tankers carrying crude, while the green icons designate commercial cargo ships navigating these regional waterways. We truly appreciate you tuning in to watch tonight's edition of the 24 Show. If you miss any part of this broadcast or wish to revisit our coverage, you can watch the entire episode again shortly on Iran International's official YouTube channel.